Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Live Healthy Now. We're going to be exploring quite a different topic today, and one that I'm really fascinated in and only really started to hear about when I did my own health coach training. We're going to be exploring cyclical living and the importance of menstrual health in people with vulvas. And I'm joined today by someone who is very passionate about this topic and is currently a menstrual cycle coach in training, as well as a holistic yoga teacher and workshop facilitator. So, welcome to the podcast, Nour Kayali.
Thank you, Nicola. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here and to talk about menstrual cycles and cyclical living and how they can really bring so much insight into our lives and work for us.
Yeah, me too. As I say, it's such a new topic, isn't it? It's something that's really only started to come, I think, into general, conversation in the wellness sector in the last couple of years. It's pretty recent. And so it's still something that I would presume the majority of people don't have an awareness of, because a bit like when you and I first spoke and talked about perimenopause and menopause and how we're only just starting to create normal conversation around that and bring it mainstream to reduce that stigma. I think menstrual cycles is kind of piggybacking, rightly so, onto that, because it's also something that's connected to that perimenopausal and menopause awareness. So we're going to explore all of that. But first, I just want to ask you to find a little bit more out about your own wellness toolkit, what your most impactful healthy habit is.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Um, I would say, I'm kind of choosing between two. The first one is journaling, getting something down on paper, usually in the morning, but if I've missed it in the morning for whatever reason, I will still, try and find a time in the day. And also just taking that pressure off of doing something every single day in the same way. So, once I started to think about consistency as something I'm committed to rather than something that needs to be 100% the same thing every day, it actually helped me do more journaling and really reap the benefits a lot more. So now sometimes journaling might look like a couple pages, sometimes it might look like one word. And taking that pressure off for it to look the same every day, I'd say has been transformative for me in my life, not just with journaling, but with other aspects too.
Oh, I love that. And that's actually a part of the way I coach and support people to build new habits, in terms of making the habit a part of you and who you are. Because when you come at it from a place of, I have to do this, I should do this, and then you feel guilty if you don't do it one day, or as you say, you miss a couple of days, that often leads to failure, because you think, well, if I haven't done it, then I'm failing. And so what's the point? And you stop it altogether. Whereas having that much
Mm.
more kinder, compassionate approach to you and why this habit matters to you is actually how to help it be much more effective, isn't it?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And I think it is a process. It's not such a overnight thing to,
Yeah.
switch on the compassion switch, right? And be like, right, I'm going to be compassionate now. It does take a while to build. And, there's so many needs and shoulds flying around, so many opinions on, what we should, I'm putting up quotation marks, should be doing and what we need to be doing. But when I'm working with people, I offer cyclical well-being sessions. When I'm working with people, I hear those come up. Oh, I need to do more of that, or I should do more of that. I actually use that as an opportunity to explore. Okay, where is that coming from? Where is that need and should coming from? Really diving into the why behind it, as you've just mentioned, Nicola, and also, is it really something that they want to do? Or is it like a societal expectation that's coming out of nowhere? Is it something sustainable for that person? Um, I think it can create some unnecessary pressure that slows us down when we like buy into those shoulds and needs, and social
Mm.
media doesn't help with that. But once we become aware of it, like if I often catch myself sometimes that creeping in and I think, oh, that's interesting. Like, why do I think I need to do that? Um, and that's also been really helpful.
Absolutely. And I guess what you've said there is actually a big piece of the values and the mission of this podcast, in that I want people to understand and be informed about what can impact their health, which generally is everything in life, in some way can have an impact on how healthy and well you are physically, mentally, spiritually, and so on. But I want people to take the thing that is going to help them for what they're perhaps struggling most with right now, or
Mm,
their goals that they have, and they think, actually, this is the thing that can help me to achieve feeling the way I want to feel and how I want to live. And so, we're bringing so many different topics and conversations to people to listen to and think about. And like this one today, it's probably very new, as I started, saying at the beginning. And this may be something that you think, well, this is on top of other things. So that's fine. You don't need to do this. We want you to be aware, because maybe if you are struggling with energy at a certain point of the month and you haven't really realized this, and we prompt that today, then this is something you can use. So yeah, I love that you've said that, actually, and just thought it was relevant to touch on what I am trying to do through the podcast and these different conversations and topics.
yeah, well, one of the beautiful things I think you're doing, Nicola, is, you're putting out some options, some insights that people really can listen to and take what resonates for them. You're never saying like you need to do this, or you
Yeah.
you should, or otherwise X. It's actually just, here is the information, because I do feel that we have a right to the knowledge and understanding, especially about things that concern our own bodies and our own
Mm-hmm.
life, just to have that understanding of what's going on, so that we can then make informed decisions in the best way, for us. And sometimes not, but that's just the way life goes. And I think it's important to have that awareness regardless.
Mm. And that's why I love this topic and wanted you to share it, because this is something that probably most people listening haven't had any information on while they were growing up. Certainly for me, I'm pushing late 40s now. This wasn't something that was ever spoke about in my sex education through school and beyond that, and life as a, woman, and starting to then learn about perimenopause only in the last sort of 3 years. So that's a great place to start, is, what is cyclical living, and why is it so important that, as you say, anyone who does have a vulva and has a menstrual cycle has that awareness and understanding?
Yeah, sure. So cyclical living, the way I see it, is one, having an awareness of the hormonal fluctuations that happen within our bodies, especially with people of reproductive age. Those hormonal fluctuations will change so rapidly every cycle, and also affect the way that we go into perimenopause and so forward. I haven't reached that yet, but learning about my menstrual cycle now, I do believe will support me going into perimenopause when that time comes. And I think vice versa as well. Even, like my mum, for example, is experiencing perimenopause now, and she's only, like a lot of women, like a lot of people, that she's only just learning about what actually happens, what are all these changes and where are they coming from. Um, so I've also been speaking with her about cyclical living, and there are ways to work with the cycle. If not the menstrual cycle, you can also use the moon cycles and use the wisdom from there to achieve that balance of, rest, reflection, but also action and motivation as well, and just have that balance of both, seeing, your energy levels and when you feel best able to focus on admin tasks or to go and network. I think it just contributes to really understanding ourselves. And cyclical living isn't another rigid set of rules. It's just, yeah, as I mentioned, it's just that understanding of, oh, okay, I know what a menstrual cycle looks like, what a typical running one where there is a bleed and there is ovulation. Um, and then you make little tweaks accordingly, depending on your own cycle.
Mm.
So maybe you've dedicate a day of rest during your bleed, or maybe you decide you want to go out and about the week after, and you arrange like a social event or invite people to your house in that phase. So it's different for everybody. And it's doing like one thing, like action-based thing on that knowledge about your own cycle.
Mm.
That was a
Yeah.
long answer to your question.
No, that's great. And I think actually what I would like to do is take a step back. Let's just start like really simply with the menstrual cycle itself, because again, not everyone actually has that awareness
Yeah.
of the different phases within a cycle. I think, we're taught, and I know my daughter's 16, so her experience of having this, at school is more recent than what mine was. But listening to what she was told, it's very simple that you're going to have a standard 28-day menstrual cycle. You'll bleed for maybe 3 to 7 days. And then, you start the process again. You release the egg in the middle of it. And then when you don't get pregnant, you have a bleed again. And it's kind of
Mm.
that basic, isn't it? But now we know there are different phases throughout that cycle. And of course, that not everybody's cycle is the standard 28 days that's often referred to. So yeah, do you want to just kind of break that down a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very kind of basic description. And to be completely honest, what I remember from the education in school was really very much you either have a period or you don't. And I think it was like 2 tablespoons or something of blood. I can't even remember it that well, but that was, pretty much it. And then by the time I got to 15, 16, I went to the GP and got the hormonal contraceptive. So I guess this is worth noting before we dive into the different phases, is that if you are on hormonal contraceptive, the phases might look very different for you. Unfortunately, the reality is that there isn't as much research on how hormones are affected if you are on hormonal contraceptive, because that can suppress ovulation and therefore suppress the rest of the cycle too, and the way that things might show up for you. So just worth bearing that in mind if you are on hormonal contraceptive. Um, you can still practice cyclical living, and you can still note when you are on your bleed, or if you do bleed, or you can use the phases of the moon as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about that now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the menstrual cycle phases. Let's start with phase 1. It's menstruation. I'll do a quick run through. And menstruation is essentially when the uterus lining sheds. So physically, we are shedding something, and it also marks the beginning of a new cycle. Typically, this is a time when hormones are at their lowest. So energy is also usually at its lowest. And then we go into follicular phase. So menstruation might last, 5-ish days plus or minus, a few days. It does look different for everybody. Follicular is, I guess you can think of it as phase 2. And it's when estrogen in the body starts rising. And I think of estrogen as being more of like an energy hormone. It's when you start to get your energy back. The uterus lining has already shed. So now, think that's on the rise. Estrogen is on the rise in the body. And most people with a natural cycle will experience that surge of energy coming back. So maybe, when you're bleeding, you might not have wanted to necessarily go out and chat to people. And then in follicular phase, that is often what happens. Just a little disclaimer there, if I've noticed that if somebody is, I don't like to necessarily use these labels of introverted and extroverted, but if you do lean more towards the introverted side, or you're simply like working on something that's very personal and you're not really, I don't know, networking and socializing that much, that surge of estrogen can still be used, not necessarily to go and be out there, but it can be put into maybe a project that you're working on or something like that. So yeah, just a note there, you will find in some of the cyclical living space, it's like, oh, that's the best time to like go out and about. But, it really depends on your personal lifestyle. So just want to keep bringing it back to that. So after follicular phase, which lasts, more or less another week, it can be longer. It really depends on the length of someone's cycle. So someone with a 25-day cycle, that length will vary to someone who's maybe 38-day cycle or something like that. Irregular cycles are more common than we realize. So we do
Yeah.
hear a lot about the 28 typical cycle, but actually irregular cycles are very, very common and affect so many of us. So just always think of that variance. So we go after follicular phase, we go into ovulation. There are 4 phases. So ovulation, you can think of as the third. This is usually the shortest phase. It's the time when you're most fertile. And typically the time when, yes, estrogen has risen, but also testosterone. So we do have testosterone as well. I think often it's thought
Yeah.
about as a very masculine hormone. People with vulvas do have testosterone too, but it's just slightly lower level. But from a maybe evolutionary perspective, it's a time when we're most fertile. Also, potentially the time where our energy is a bit more out there too. Then we drop into luteal phase, and luteal phase is that section before your period and after ovulation. So it's kind of, I like to think of it as a bit of the drop down, because estrogen drops there, and then our hormone progesterone is what rises. And progesterone can be thought of as sort of the calming hormone. It's there to provide those calming benefits. But it often presents maybe as irritability and annoyance. And I personally believe that's because of, the society we live in. It's very much an expectation to be on go, go, go all the time. So the reality is, for many of us, we can't completely live in accordance to those hormonal fluctuations because it's just might just not be realistic for our day-to-day life. But I think sometimes that interruption or not even being aware of it, definitely was the case for me a few years back, can really worsen those premenstrual symptoms, PMS. You might have heard I'm on PMSing or something like that. And it can aggravate that. But it's, for me, luteal phase used to be the phase that I dreaded for a while when it came around every cycle, because I knew that was when I was at my most sensitive, most irritable. And now it's actually one of my favorite times because I've managed to use it as a time to really ground. I will try and maybe reduce some of my social activities, start to prepare the space, think about any projects I want to complete. I've noticed for me, it's a good time to just get into some admin tasks that I would find so boring in my follicular phase. You can really learn to work with it, and it does take some time. And then we get back into menstruation. So just to summarize, it's 4 phases: menstruation, follicular, ovulation, and luteal. And the way it can relate to the moon phases, if you are not menstruating for whatever reason, and the moon phases are more based on ancient wisdom, and the menstrual cycle phases are very much, yes, based on ancient wisdom too, but it does have very much that scientific, backup as well, with the hormonal fluctuations that have been shown in studies. But, we find a lot of the time that ancient wisdom, somehow they prove something that someone said millions of years ago.
Yeah.
It does come up. There is a lot to be said for ancient wisdom as well.
Mm.
But you can think of new moon as menstruation, and then waxing moon, so as the moon gets bigger, as your follicular phase. You can think of full moon as ovulation, which is also quite a nice time to bring in any celebratory energy. And then luteal phase as waning moon, which is when the moon starts to show less and less. So new moon is not visible in the sky at all. And you can adjust things in that way. So I'm actually working with somebody now, and we are using the moon cycles, and she's loving it because it just
Mm.
provides that perspective of, oh, I don't need to do the exact same thing every day. Actually, there is a time I can dedicate to reflection, to rest, but also to action and to evaluating and celebrating. And it can work with the cycle, and you feel more connected to nature, more connected to what I believe in something greater, in a way that we are all connected. And when we bring attention to the moon or to our inner cycles, I think it facilitates that connection as well.
Mm. Oh, thanks for explaining that so well. No, it, just hearing you explain those four phases and the different things. And I know you've given us a whistle stop to it because there's so much more depth we could go into about the way the hormones are fluctuating and what that means in lots of different ways, both physically and mentally. Um, excuse me, but the way that you've set that up, I think is enough to give people that kind of penny drop moment of, oh, yeah, I am different throughout the month. And yet
Mm,
the way life is expected to be lived is the same day to day. For a lot of people who work in full-time jobs, whether you're employed or running your own business, every day needs to kind of be the same. You've got a
mm,
home, a family, a job, responsibilities, commitments, and so on. And this is why we wanted to share this topic, and why this topic is having a lot more focus and research into it, because we aren't the same because of how our hormones fluctuate as women. I know I
mm,
just want to clarify this, Nour, because you used the phrasing, and I think we touched on this at the beginning, of people who have vulvas, because not everyone who is born female menstruates and different. So if you just want to explain that, just to give us that inclusivity of the what we're talking about.
Sure, absolutely. So, I say people with vulvas, or women and people with vulvas, because not everybody who experiences the menstrual cycle identifies as a woman, and equally not every woman experiences a menstrual cycle, whether that's due to things like amenorrhea, which is the absence of a period for whatever reason, or going through menopause, or perimenopause, I should say, or maybe the cycle has just stopped for whatever reason, hormonal contraceptive. So,
Mm.
yeah, the reason I like to use people with vulvas, because I feel like it encompasses those that I'm speaking to and about the cycle.
Yeah,
Uh,
thank you. Yeah, so I think it shows that there's a need to understand yourself and your body and the changes, so that you can be more compassionate with yourself, because we do have a tendency to be quite hard on ourselves, when we aren't performing with as much energy or vitality. I know certainly in my space, when people are working out and it's like, oh,
mm,
I can't do this today. I just don't have the energy, and can get quite negative and down on themselves about, not being able to lift as heavy a weight, or,
mm,
go at something with as much high intensity as perhaps they have before. But as you've just said there, we're changing throughout that cycle, whatever length your cycle is, if it's the 28 days, 35, 40, you are shifting. And so having some awareness can then help you to notice when things are different. And if you haven't got as much concentration or focus or energy or strength, and so on, then yeah, that's fine. And like you said, with the example of socializing and connecting with people, there are times that I know I certainly feel like I just don't want to see anyone, really. I do just need my own space. And then you can
mm,
easily go, oh, what's wrong with me? Why don't I want to, be with other people, and see that as a negative? And where we started from when we very first spoke was, all of those belief systems that have been embed into us and that we now carry from a young
mm.
age, because of what society has just known and adopted, isn't it? So, and that's why you're driven to share this and work with organizations and people individually as well, to help them have this awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so well said. Yeah, I guess for me, I really want, like, where my sense of purpose and mission comes from. It's like I just want people to stop beating themselves up, around these
Yeah.
things, especially when it's actually not needed. But once we understand what's going on in the body, and we think about the circadian rhythm, which is so popular, the 24-hour cycle. We have that too, and that's important too. but people with vulvas do also have a longer cycle of 28-ish, can I say ish, days. Um, and yeah, our hormones fluctuate in the same way they would from morning to night. So if you even just think about
Mm.
during the day when you feel most energized versus when you feel most relaxed, imagine that stretching across the whole month and how different that can look, and then how you can work with yourself in that way. Um, and I guess it's worth mentioning as well during luteal phase, which is a period that a lot of people struggle with, the also PMS phase. And PMS is really just premenstrual symptoms. So it's anything you notice, whether that's getting more emotional, getting cramps, anything like that that you notice before your period. During that phase, the body is actually preparing itself for a potential pregnancy, and it's creating that nurturing environment in the
Mm.
womb. So doing things like creating a nurturing environment for yourself externally as well to mirror what's going on in the body can be a great way of working with yourself and really, upping the self-care, the self-nurturing during that phase. I just wanted to share that tip as well because I know that that's a popular time where a lot of people struggle.
Yeah. And I think this is why when people start to experience perimenopause and the changes that brings, it's maybe felt more comes like hits them harder. I guess is what I'm trying to say because
Mm,
I'm almost 48, so I started to get perimenopausal symptoms about a year or so ago. Maybe some of them were earlier because there's so many. Who knows what things were going on and whether they were linked to my hormones before that. But I'd lived from starting my period probably 32 years or something, just thinking everything's the same. Yes, you have that maybe bit of PMS and you have the inconvenience, as I've seen it, of the monthly
mm,
bleed and the pain that can often bring and discomfort and just, generally not being a nice thing to have to deal with and still go out to work and other things that you may have on. And then perimenopause comes and it's like, whoa, there's something wrong. I'm feeling this, I'm feeling it. This has changed, that's changed. But
mm,
actually, that's just an exaggeration, really, of those fluctuations that we have in a normal cycle through those four phases. It's that the roller coaster of those changes in the four phases you've shared gets
mm,
exaggerated. It's a faster ride, it's got more dips and more peaks. And so actually what we're experiencing generally from the point that you start your period starts to just shift and become much more exaggerated, doesn't it, with those changes? So I think having that awareness, like for my daughter at 16, I want her to know this stuff because I want
mm,
her to be aware, that it's okay to not feel, like we said, as energized or to want to be with people or other mood shifts or just general physical changes and so on, and how that might play out in the way you go about your life, so that she has that information to support herself, but also to know that there will be a point much later in adulthood where that does start to happen much more frequently, maybe even within a day. We see the hormonal changes shift so rapidly in a lot of people. So I think it's great to think about it in that way. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Actually, I'm learning from you, Nicola, with that because,
Mhm.
yeah, as I mentioned, I haven't experienced that just yet. But yeah, I think from what I've heard from people, it can really look different. And when you think of the cycle, it's almost like shortcutting, like you said, sometimes in the space of a day, of these changes. And I feel like I would like to learn more as well about menopause and perimenopause, and we're not generally really prepared for it
Mhm.
in any way. Now conversations are getting more and more, but I would love to kind of bridge the two, both the awareness of the cycle, before perimenopause, but also what's gonna what can we expect, or what ways can we support ourselves during perimenopause as well when that time does come.
Yeah, and I love that there is that connection and that we want to make that become normal, so that it's not standalone perimenopause, menopause,
Mm,
and then the menstrual cycles tagged on, and it's not given the attention and focus it deserves, that we marry them together, because it is all about that hormonal cycle of the full lifespan, isn't it? From
mm,
puberty all of the way post menopause, and the different things that can change. Because I'm driven to support people who are experiencing perimenopause and menopause, both individually and in workplaces. But there are many other people with vulvas who menstruate who need that support way beyond perimenopause, because we know there are a lot of people who struggle with severe PMS, other,
yeah.
hormonal and menstrual related conditions like PCOS. I had Emily, who I think
Mm,
who we share networking with, on the podcast recently, talking about her experience with PCOS and how she didn't know anything. And I had a big light bulb moment chatting to her about the fact that I haven't explained to my daughter what isn't normal. We have,
mm.
like we said, this is how it should be, but we don't then say, and if this happens, be aware and ask and get help from, someone or
Yes.
your doctor or whoever.
Oh,
Yeah.
definitely. I'm so passionate about that as well, because, there are things out there like endometriosis and
Mm,
quite, I hear these stories quite a lot of people going to the doctor and saying, oh, I'm actually experiencing severely painful periods, and it is disrupting everything. And having a period, having your bleed, yes, it can provide a little bit of discomfort, but it should not be severe pain where
mm,
you feel paralyzed. But sometimes these people get sent away saying, it will pass, just put a hot water bottle, which, yes, might relieve a little bit, but it doesn't get to the root of the issue.
yeah.
So to anybody who's struggling with severely painful periods, my advice would be, don't give up on trying to find a specialist that will take it seriously, um, because that should be taken seriously.
Yeah, and I think another thing which has been quite like prominent for me with the age loss is hearing from other parents with daughters of similar age, actually some of them are much younger, who are struggling with really, severe PMS symptoms or heavy bleeding or both, and go to the doctor, and the doctors just say, we'll just put them straight on the contraceptive pill. And again, not
Mm,
really looking at, is there something else underlying? And that is what happened in Emily's story. And then she wasn't diagnosed with PCOS, and the pill was actually making it worse because of what PCOS is, with the hormones and so on. So yeah, I think having owning the fact that you have this cycle, I think, can be a very empowered approach, in knowing
mm,
that you can connect with how that feels, and check in with, you know, knowledge around what is normal. Not that there is necessarily normal, but as much as we can, with, should I be feeling this extreme in my mood swings or energy
mm,
dips or pain or the heaviness or lightness even of the flow? I know, again, it's opposite ends of the scale. You can have people who have very heavy bleeds, but people who have very light bleeds, and then people who don't bleed for 3 or 4 months, and they just, again, think that's normal. And often we know there's something causing that, which can be missed. And so, yeah, a lot. I
yeah.
think the key is awareness, isn't it? And I'm interested to know, from the work that you have been doing, what is the kind of response when you are in workplaces in particular, in groups like that? Are you finding that workplaces and organizations are receptive? Do they get this, and are they genuinely interested in it?
Yeah, so more and more organizations are becoming interested in this, especially as around menopause. A lot more companies are like bringing in menopause awareness and training. Menstrual health, I still feel it's on the rise. It's just started to come in more and more. But if it were up to me, I would make it a compulsory part of everybody's training, including people without vulvas, because you know if we're thinking men, like a lot of them work with somebody who might be menstruating or menopausal, or maybe it's their family member. They literally came from somebody
Yeah.
who at some point had a menstrual cycle, and it's really important for them to know this stuff too. But yeah, I think that the most important thing is for us to have access wherever possible. And I appreciate, that is also a privilege. But I do believe it's a human right as well that we understand what's going on in our bodies so that we can then, move forward or
Mm.
optimize things in the way we want to. And I call it reclaiming, really. It's reclaiming our natural rhythms. Some people talk about the menstrual cycle as inner seasons, with winter being your menstruation and go
Yeah.
forth ovulation being the inner summer. And that's quite a nice way to look at it as well.
Yeah. And there are things happening globally with this as well. There's some interesting changes started to happen in certain countries around this. I think Spain's one of them, isn't it? That is really recognised how much we can change through that cycle, and have brought in
Mm.
some kind of, I don't know, is it a law or is it just something that workplaces are beginning to adopt?
Yeah, it's like so Spain brought in like a menstrual bleed law where you take, I think you're
Mm.
entitled to, I can't remember exactly how long, but you're entitled to a certain number of days off or time off. Um, which I do think is positive, because rest during the menstruation is actually really productive because the cycle is all linked. And, I find if I haven't really had a chance to properly rest, or haven't, made the opportunity to rest during my bleed, it will often disrupt the rest of the cycle. Maybe in my follicular phase, when usually my energy is a bit more out there, it often presents as a bit more scattered or unfocused. Whereas if I've really rested during my bleed, I will find that when I do want to put my energy into things after, I feel more able to choose what to concentrate on and where I want to dedicate that energy. So I do think it's a step in the right direction. But a lot of people will still want to work to some extent on their bleed. So I think it's just more like understanding what that person wants for them. And if they do need to take it a bit easier for whatever reason, then they can. I appreciate not everyone has that opportunity. So for listeners who are like, I can't do that,
Yeah.
like I have
I'm
to
a
go and
teacher or I'm a nurse or
I,
yeah, a doctor.
exactly, I'm a teacher or nurse or whatever it is. And I would say, what's the minimum thing that you can do to honor your bleed? Like, can you, for 5 minutes when you get home, can you, switch off the lights and just be in darkness with yourself, and have like a 5-minute meditation, maybe put a candle on, just to, recognize that you're on your bleed.
Mm.
And back in the day, in those matrilineal societies, women were, respected when they were on their bleed. They would often bleed with other women in kind of like a cave. And, people would know that when they would come out, they're going to come out with a lot of wisdom. And, it's really incredible. And the more you work with your cycle, you can think, okay, any wisdom that's come to me during that time or during the full moon, how can I then incorporate that going forward into the cycle? And then by the time it gets to full moon, there's something to celebrate, from having acted on the wisdom that came at the very start of the cycle. And we're getting a bit more kind of into the spiritual side of it now, but
Yeah.
there are many, many ways to work with it.
And the spiritual side of it, if you were listening and you haven't heard about this and you're like, the moon? What, the moon? Yeah, as you said, no, this is, thousands and thousands of years old. And like many things that we actually are seeing as very valuable in our health and well-being, that's where they originate from. If you look back through so many of the religions, and yeah, lots of things that we have about history and how tribes lived and survived and so on. This is how we evolved, and the moon is connected to our hormones. That's something we could probably do a whole other podcast on. It's not woo woo, this is fact. The moon is the power, isn't it? Look at the tides and our weather and everything. It's so powerful. So yeah, if you want to find out more about that, then you can connect with Nour and the moon. Yeah, I think it's a fascinating thing, which I know certainly in perimenopause is being used to help women as well, because as you said, there are a lot
Mm,
of women who don't have cycles, whether they're still on contraceptive hormonal treatments, or it's through hormone replacement for menopause or other problems. You know, it doesn't have to be hormonal contraceptive. Actually, it could be one of the coils that doesn't have hormones in but stops you from menstruating. So yeah, there's lots of different reasons why the moon is becoming again a big part of hormonal health for, as you said, you know,
Mm.
people with vulvas and those who need it, who can't track through their own cycles.
Yeah, it's almost like nature's, blueprint is there already that
Yeah.
we can use for ourselves. And I went through a period of not having a period. A time of, I've not when I came off the pill, the hormonal contraceptive, I didn't get my period for about 3 years. And 1 year
Wow.
passed, and the doctor said, "Oh, don't worry, it will calm. Your body's regulating." 2 years, I was like, "Okay, something's wrong." I did all the
Mm.
tests. Everything was seemingly fine on the outside. But I later discovered it was, well, I wasn't really aware of the cycle. I wasn't eating enough. I was, over exercising, not getting enough healthy fats in and things like that. But what really helped me to get it back and regulate it again was something called seed cycling.
Mm.
Um, and seed cycling is actually used for people across the whole life cycle. And it's a way of balancing those estrogen and progesterone levels using different seeds at different points. And I was using the moon to keep me on track of, okay, I think it's like sesame and sunflower seeds for one half of the cycle, flaxseed and pumpkin seed for the second half. And anybody who's interested, just a quick Google search of seed cycling will tell you all you need to know. If you're not having a period or a menstrual cycle, whether you're experiencing menopause or something else, I would highly recommend looking into
Mm.
that. Unless you have a
Yeah,
seed
I've heard of
allergy, then maybe not.
it. I've heard about that. I have lots of seeds. I just eat whatever seeds every day, but hopefully that's not doing anything adverse. Yeah, it's been great talking about this, and I really hope we've helped people to, you know, hear about something that possibly is new or hasn't really been at the forefront of thinking about your own health and wellness. And if you think, actually, yeah, maybe I do need to think about this, then, you know, let us know where we can connect with you now, and I'll pop it into the show notes as well.
Yeah, so you can connect with me. Probably the easiest way is on Instagram. It's at Kayalin Yoga. So that's Kayalin yoga, or Nour Kayali on LinkedIn. I think, yeah, my website is also kayalinyoga.com. So very happy
Mm.
to connect on there. And it's been such a pleasure speaking with you, Nicola. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been great. And just to kind of wrap up, I think the thing that's come through for me, that is my takeaway, is that self-awareness is so key to then have self-compassion, because
Mm,
there is a lot of, I think, stigma. I know it's a strong word, but there is a lot of stigma attached to that period and time of your bleed each month. You know, and certainly, I know we touched a little bit on men, but there can be a lot of, you know, kind of joking around it and reference made to you bleeding and, oh, is it just your time of
mm,
the month? You know, and things that make you think to feel that way is wrong and it's not right, and
mm,
that you should just kind of, you know, stand up tall and get on with it and be a woman and, you know, be strong and so on. And so that's the big thing for me, I think, is just having awareness is a starting
mm.
point so that you can support yourself and give yourself more compassion. And yeah, just ask you to finish off, what would be one tip to give someone if they were wanting to improve the health in this area and build a new habit, because that's what we're all about, building new habits.
Okay, so I would say the one thing to start that would be a good starting point is to track. And what I mean by that, in the most simplest of ways, is to literally just write one word that you are experiencing that day, and then have that through your whole cycle. And then once you've been doing that for about 3 cycles, or whether that's moon cycles or your menstrual, you'll start to notice patterns at different times.
Mm.
So I use there's a really great woman called Maisie Hill, and she's written a book called Period Power and Perimenopause Power. So I highly recommend her books. But she has this chart which is basically a circle with little kind of slices, And I use that to just write a word, whether it's calm, energized, ready, grounded, whatever it is. And after about 3, I can start to see a pattern of what's going on. I mean, I've
Oh,
been doing this
lovely.
for quite a long time, so I know my patterns quite well.
Mm,
But if you're completely new to this, I would say give yourself at least 3 before you start to look at your patterns. You'll already know, you'll already have a bit of a sense of that inside you. Um, but yeah, if you want to kind of start looking at it from an objective point of view, give it 3 cycles and just track 1 word a day. It'll take you about
mm.
less than a minute.
Brilliant. And I was going to say, as you started giving that tip about apps, but I love that you've just shown, if you're not watching, Nour's just shown a A4 sheet of paper with this circle printed off, and we can pop the link into the notes to get it. And that's actually a great thing to have when you are building a habit. Is one of the tips I give is to make it visual. So having something like that there, maybe at the side of your bed, that you do first thing in the morning or when you come home from work or before sleep and so on, can be really good to remember to do that 1 word every month. So that's a fab tip. And I think if anyone is listening and this isn't relevant for you, share it with those in your life who it might be, especially if you do have young daughters like what I do. I think this could be something that really empowers them from that very early stage of their reproductive and menstrual life onwards to really own those cycles and just be informed and be compassionate. So thank you again. I've really enjoyed it. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it too. Take care.